In my mind, I see a line. And over that line, I see green fields and lovely flowers and beautiful white women with their arms stretched out to me over that line. But I can't seem to get there no how. I can't seem to get over that line.
These were the words of Viola Davis at the 2015 Emmy Award ceremony during her acceptance speech for Best Actress for her role as Annalise Keating in ABC's How to Get Away with Murder series. This was a very significant moment in Black history and in film history. 2015 was the year of the 67th Emmy Awards, yet Viola was the first woman of colour to win the Emmy for Best Actress. So significant, in fact, the clip you just saw was Viola Davis quoting the words of Harriet Tubman. To quote a woman who saved the lives of hundreds of slaves speaks volumes for what this meant. Viola went on to say,
"You cannot win an Emmy for roles that are simply not there." So here's to all the writers, the awesome people who have redefined what it means to be beautiful, to be sexy, to be a leading woman, to be Black.
Black culture has a very long history in cinema, but the way Black people have been represented has not been accurate or fair. Film is a very powerful device that impacts many people with the power to influence how they perceive and treat others. So with this in mind, how are Black people represented in film? The majority of depictions of Black people are degrading and detrimental to the perception of Black people and Black communities. What has been done to accurately represent Black people in film? To answer this, we have to go back and look at the history of depictions of Black people in film. What you see was once considered comedy and fun for the whole family. This is one of the earliest and possibly one of the most offensive portrayals of Black people in film. This is Blackface. Blackface is a form of theatrical makeup predominantly used by non-Black performers to represent a Black person. The vehicle for this depiction of Black people were minstrel shows. The minstrel shows, or minstrelsy, was an American form of entertainment developed in the early 19th century. Each show consisting of comic skits, variety acts, dancing and music performances that mocked people specifically of African descent. If you find these visuals repulsing or upsetting, that serves as a testament to how far society has come. The film industry is a very powerful industry, and with great power comes great responsibility. But this power has been misused in the form of institutional racism, using the media exposure to willfully contradict how Black people were portrayed in film compared to reality in order to influence the views of others. This was particularly prolific when looking at how society was dictated, essentially teaching audiences this is what you should expect from Black people. As time went on, the depiction of Black people in film evolved, but not necessarily for the better. It was eventually deemed acceptable to have Black actors in films, but this led to the origin of Blaxploitation. A portmanteau of Black and exploitation, the term was coined to describe the exploitation of Black people in regard to the stereotyped roles used in films. Perhaps the most notorious example of this is Lincoln Perry, better known by his stage name Stepin Fetchit. Starring in numerous films, Stepin Fetchit was an unintelligent, bumbling, subservient character known as the laziest man in the world.
Would y'all bring that big box in here? We ain't got enough candy to fit no box that big.
This is not for candies.
No, other customers got to have something that was for candy.
This happens to be a coffin.
Coffin? Ain't nobody dead in here, is it?
But in his personal life, Perry was very intellectual and had a career writing for the Chicago Defender. This immense contrast shows the disparity between what reality was and what the masses were being told. For many people in the Black community, Perry was a point of contention, as he was willingly portraying a Black character in a negative light, which had an impact on how Black people were perceived. But it was this factor that directly contributed to his fame and fortune.
Same thing with Stepin Fetchit. And Seven Fetchers made more money than anybody in Hollywood at the time. There wasn't a white movie came out that made more money than Seven Fetchers movies.
Wow. You know what I learned about him is the fact that he was an intellectual. I know he used to write for the Chicago Defender.
Mm-hmm.
He was a very brilliant guy.
Though there have been many instances of poor representation, there has also been progress made in the industry, with landmark cases such as Hattie McDaniel being the first black woman to win an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress in 1940. This was for her role as Mammy in 1939's Gone with the Wind by Victor Fleming.
And suck in.
Mammy, here's Miss Scarlett's victuals. You can take that all back to the kitchen. I won't need to buy it.
Oh, yes, you is. You's going to eat every mouthful of this.
Although this acknowledged her work, at the ceremony itself she had to sit in the coloured section, separate from the white actors and actresses. Sidney Poitier's career was also a step forward, specifically his roles in 1967's Guess Who's Coming to Dinner by Stanley Kramer, in which he played a doctor engaged to an upper-class white woman.
Mom, it's John Wade Prentice. Isn't that a lovely name?
John Wade.
Joanna Prentice I'll be.
And 1967's In the Heat of the Night by Norman Jewison, in which he played a police detective charged with solving a small-town murder, and was the first film to show a black man striking a white man.
We were just trying to clarify some of the evidence. Was Mr. Colbert ever in this greenhouse, say last night about midnight?
These roles were adverse to the stereotypes found in other films, and Poitier was a very accomplished individual. Knighted by Queen Elizabeth in 1974, he also served as a non-resident Bahamian ambassador to Japan in 1997 for 10 years, and was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the United States' highest civilian honor, by President Obama in 2009, and in 2016 he was awarded the BAFTA Fellowship for Outstanding Lifetime Achievement in Film. In the social hierarchy of America, white people are on the top and all non-white people are at the bottom. Stereotypes are used to promote this racially oppressive society. A stereotype is a widely held but fixed and oversimplified image or idea of a particular type of person or thing, and there are numerous stereotypes of black people in film. The darky, or the coon, was a term used to mock black people's attempts at integrating into a white society, typically used to describe the character of a blackface performer. The sambo was lazy and content with a lesser standard of living, a summation of the character Step and Fetch It. The mammy was humble, older, and typically large in size. In a subservient role, she is the ideal housemaid or serving staff. The savage, meant to portray black people as animalistic and primitive, essentially less than human. The sapphire, the notion that black women are unladylike and aggressive. The Jezebel, portraying black women as promiscuous by nature and therefore could not be victims of rape. The Mandingo, the idea that black men are wild and violent and their actions are based on sexual instinct. A key part of black history was the civil rights movement, starting in the mid-1950s with the case of Brown versus the Board of Education on the 17th of May 1954, followed by key events such as the Montgomery bus boycott in December of 1955, Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech in 1963, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the March of Selma to Montgomery, the murder of Malcolm X in 1965, and the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968. The film industry during this time reflected the social landscape in the films released. Films such as 1964's Black Like Me by Carl Lerner, based on the true events in which a white reporter temporarily darkens his skin so that he can experience what it's like to live as a black man in the segregated South of the US. And Michael Romer's Nothing But a Man, about the struggles of a black man facing discrimination and racism. Both of these films releasing the same year the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed. The 1970s was a new era of cinema, heavily influenced by the funk music of the time. Funk music is a genre of music that originated in black communities when black musicians created a rhythmic form of music with its stylistic origins in soul, rhythm and blues and jazz. The immense popularity of funk music led to a saturation of funk-based films with heavy emphasis on the soundtracks and the actions of black characters. But these films often played into black stereotypes of cinema, with black men often represented as violent, dangerous and disruptive, and showing black women to be lascivious and sexually promiscuous. This can be seen in 1971's Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song by Melvin Van Peebles and 1973's Coffee by Jack Hill. A point of significance is that Jack Hill was a white man that grew up in LA, but wrote and directed a film about a black nurse that fights against inner-city drug dealers. The titular character, Coffee, is hypersexualized, quick to resort to violence, and often in compromising situations. The plethora of films such as Shaft, Superfly, Blackula, The Mac, Foxy Brown, Black Belt Jones, and many others eventually gained the term blaxploitation for their overt use of narrow representations of black men and women. This flood of blaxploitation films was a significant contributing factor to the rising racial tensions of the time. Fortunately, in more recent years there has been more opportunities for black actors and actresses to represent black people. This came about due to productions willing to cast a black performer for a role that didn't actively require the character to be black. Such as Will Smith in 1997's Men in Black, where in the original comic book his character was depicted as white. Or Idris Elba playing the role of Heimdall in Marvel's connected universe of films. But this approach has not always been met with a positive response. 2014's remake of Annie received backlash for casting Quvenzhané Wallis, a young black actress, as Annie. Creating films based on real events is a technique often used in the film industry, and 2016's Hidden Figures by Theodore Melfi is an exemplary representation of not only black people, but the plights black women faced in particular.
No protocol for women attending.
There's no protocol for a man circling the earth either, sir.
Every time we have a chance to get ahead, they move the finish line. Every time.
We all get there together, or we don't get there at all.
2018 was the debut of the CW's Black Lightning series, in which a school principal fights for his city as both a vigilante Black Lightning, but also as a prominent member of the community.
Where is the future?
Right here.
And whose life is this?
Mine.
And what are you gonna do with it?
Live by any means necessary.
What makes this series a great example of black representation is the fact that it shines a light on the struggles that some black communities face to this day, such as gang violence, racial oppression, and police brutality. And to add to this, the main characters are wide-ranging, from a teacher, Anissa Pierce, who is a black lesbian, a positive representation of both black women and lesbians, something rarely seen in the public eye, to Khalil Payne, a rising star student, until he is caught up in the midst of a gang attack, showing the kind of impact these issues can have on young black people. Black Panther is by far the biggest representation of black people in modern cinema. Directed by Ryan Coogler and having grossed over $1.3 billion worldwide, Black Panther has without a doubt become a sensation in the global black community.
Like all the time? So we sitting here looking at this dope-ass Black Panther poster, and the conclusion that we have come to is that this is what white people get to feel all the time.
All the time! All the time!
Since the beginning of cinema.
All the time!
You get to feel empowered like this and represented.
This is what y'all feel like all the time? I would love this country too.
With black people around the world, especially famous black people, sharing their love and admiration for the film, most notably by performing the Wakandan salute shown in the film. Black Panther is the first non-white superhero to have his own film, making this a milestone movie. On the surface, Black Panther is the latest in a very long line of superhero films in recent years, but at its core, Black Panther is about black pride, culture, and the suffrage of black people. The cast list for this film is full of talented black performers. Although it's not the first time there's been a large number of black performers in a film, this is a cast of 90% black people, and the roles they play are very different from the roles that you would find in other large Hollywood films that have such a large black cast. This film presents the audience with strong, uncompromising women in the form of the King's personal guards, the Dora Milaje, a princess with a genius-level intellect that works in the STEM fields in the King's younger sister Shuri, and a compassionate and merciful king in T'Challa. This film is so deep in its understanding of the perspective of black people around the world, by the end of it you can be perfectly justified for sympathising with the antagonist and his goals of bringing liberation to oppressed black people around the world. His final words being,
"Just bury me in the ocean with my ancestors that jumped from the ships, because they knew death was better than bondage."
This was in reference to African slaves that jumped from the slave ships. What makes this film so good at representing black people is the diversity of points of view it offers the audience. For individuals, regardless of whether they are male or female, or black or not, it's possible for each audience member to align themselves to at least one of the characters' perspectives. As a black person myself, it would be a disservice to not take a moment to enclose my own opinion about this film. And that is, if you're black, regardless of whether you're Jamaican, Kenyan, Nigerian, or wherever your roots may lay, this film says a lot about Pan-Africanism and black togetherness. And even if you are not black, this presents you with an opportunity to gain a greater understanding of what it's like to be a black person, especially in today's society. So with all that said, how are black people represented in film? The truth is, progress has been made in leaps and bounds, particularly in more recent years. But I believe we are not yet at the point where we can say black people get the same representation in film as white people, but the future is brighter than ever.